Welcome everyone to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. On today's episode, we'll give you a quick update on the Fangtooth Beta, which is landing very soon, talk about push versus pull replication, and why you should probably be using the latter, and of course, answering a whole raft of viewer questions. Man, we got a lot of them, Chris. We put out the call at the end of last episode for people to put their questions in. We got so many, I don't even think we'll be able to answer them all today.
No, there was too much. Maybe I was too aggressive asking for people to submit questions, but no, that's a great thing. I'd rather have too many rather than too few. Again, that dyslexia kicking in, but it's going to be great. Keep them coming. Like, we want to know what you're thinking. What are you struggling with? What features you want to talk about? What scenarios, setups? Like, this is why we're here, to help answer questions and hopefully, provide good advice going forward and, further the discussion.
Absolutely. But before we jump into the viewer questions, let's do our quick little bit of news updates. So Fangtooth BETA1, everybody's really excited about this. And I hear we are aiming for a next week release on Beta 1.
Yeah, it's just around the corner. So, of course, this will go live on Friday, which means we only have 6 days to go. It's slated for Thursday next week, Thursday the 13th of February, if you're watching this later. But that looks to be on track. Testing's going well. So far, all the built-in NAS functionality, the core functionality, if you will, seems really rock solid. So feeling really good there. OpenZFS 2.3, the final polished release version, is a really nice update. We're going to be eager to hear from folks who are now using that, especially if we've heard from folks doing RAID Z expansion. We've talked about how that's been optimized and greatly sped up in this version. So it'd be good to get some community feedback on that soon.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be a lot faster.
Oh, yeah. Like, they've removed the bottlenecks now. You're kind of just limited by the write speed of your device. So that's great.
Awesome.
Really looking forward to getting that in people's hands. One feature that didn't make the cut, though, is direct I/O. So just as a heads up, we've disabled that in the beta release. Probably will disable it throughout the whole Fangtooth release cycle. It just needs some time maturing upstream. There's a handful of issues people are still investigating. And when it comes to storage and your bits on disk, we tend to want to be very conservative about the kind of features we flip on and, what's enabled by default. And so when we detect a problem, that's why we do all this internal testing. We make a call, and in this case, we said, we're going to give that one a little bit more bake time first, and then see. And I know you had a question here about NVIDIA, about what one of the issues was.
Yeah, that's basically, it's I think it's something that's in TrueNAS itself because of the way we're layering the NVIDIA driver on. It might be that there's a conflict between the direct I/O engaging the NVMe devices, and it's somehow interfering with trying to engage with the PCI devices for NVMe
No.
NVIDIA
The details, we did do a little investigation of this. It actually has more to do with the systemd extension functionality and how we do layering of file systems. So for those that don't know, your root image, your boot pool of TrueNAS, it's read-only by default. That's very intentional, so things can't tamper with it. You get extra security, auditing, all that good stuff. But what happens when you want to go load a driver or a tool or something? So you sometimes need to put those in the base system somewhere. So what we did is we've leveraged systemd's extension capabilities, which, to think of it as a layered file system. Upper layer is UnionFS, if you're kind of familiar with that world. And what we found is when you have direct I/O enabled, there was a bug there that exposed a kernel panic. So the NVIDIA driver turning that on triggered it, but it wasn't NVIDIA specific. We have other system extensions we're potentially going to be adding in the future, and it would have hit those too. But again, we looked and said, hey, this is interesting. We're going to report this. We'll work with upstream to see if we can get these things resolved. And there's a handful of other things folks have pointed out too that need to be improved with direct I/O. So we just made a call to say we're going to leave it off for the time being. Again, data safety is the most important thing, and stability. And that seemed like the right call to make at this time.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. As much as everybody wants to see the faster speeds that we get with direct I/O, the corrupted data coming in quickly is not worth anything to anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Better do it right and take it a little bit easier here. But likely means we'll turn it back on in Goldeye. Give the team an upstream time to go and kind of sort out those issues. They'll probably be in OpenZFS 2.3.1, 2.3.2 by then, and we'll pull those in with Goldeye.
Sounds good.
For other news, though, so we've talked a lot about the new VM section. So first of all, the legacy VM section has now been removed in favor of the new Incus-backed LXC and VMs. So the king is dead. All hail the king.
Long live the king.
That's right. Last feature to enable importing your old ZVOLs from previous VMs, that has been added. That will make it for the beta. I actually just did my own testing of it a few days ago. I had a previously created Windows 11 ZVOL. It was 15 seconds. I went through the wizard. I said, here's the ZVOL. Here's the options. Give it the memory and RAM I want. Set up VNC. Boom. I was done. It was amazingly quick. So again, a little bit of a pain in the sense that you have to go manually set it up, but we're talking one time and it should be easy. As one caveat for the beta, we have not exposed the PCIe pass-through to VMs yet. They're not implemented on our side, meaning the UI. Incus does support it. There's a command line way to go and attach a PCI device to your VM. So if you're a beta tester, either you can do it from the command line potentially, and we'll put something in the docs about that, or just wait until RC and we'll get the knob back in the UI. So it's just a drop down and you can select it. So just a quick caveat. But aside from that, it's looking pretty darn solid.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, I know there's a lot of people looking forward to Fangtooth for sure. I know I'm looking forward to some of the other exciting features in there. Like I want to try out FastDedupe quite a bit more myself. I have a lot of potential use cases for that one that I want to test.
We're seeing more and more people flip that on. We've done a ton of testing with it internally here as well. We're seeing good results. In a way, it's kind of anticlimactic. You turn it on, it's like, it works. Okay, what else am I going to do?
When things work, sometimes it's really nice. You go, well, I expected more, but it's just working. All right,
it just kind of works. It does its thing, so that's a good thing. I guess those are the kind of features you want, where you just flip it on, and you don't think about it, and it just does the job. So we've been doing testing with it internally, and it works. If you throw block storage at it and point your VMware system at it, and then create a bunch of Windows VMs and start loading your Linux ISOs into them, you'll see the deduplication kicking in. You're seeing the rate go up. So again, it's doing the job. It seems to be working pretty well.
Sounds good. All right. Well, let's jump into our second topic here, which is talking about the ZFS replication. Now, that's a feature that's been in there for a long time, very well tested, but maybe a little bit misunderstood. So we'll talk about sort of directionality of replication. We've been talking about push versus pull here, Chris. Let's sum up the basic idea of why is somebody going to consider one over the other?
Sure. Well, I think this is where, again, there might be a little bit of a misconception. A lot of people say, well, I have my system. It's my primary. I want to set up backups to another system. So it's just kind of natural and maybe intuitive the way we think that, well, I'm going to set up snapshots in a push job because I'm doing it all. I'm in the one interface. And I think that's why people just default. That's the easy way to do it. But then there's this other directionality side of, can you set up a pull task? And I guess a lot of folks don't stop and consider, well, why would I do that? Why would I take the slightly more inconvenient route and go to my secondary system and then set up a job to pull from my primary, as opposed to just pushing and having it all done in one and be convenient?
Well, given the one-word answer here, Chris, why would you do this?
Security. That's what I put in the notes here. That's the real reason you would think about this. So what I think a lot of folks overlook is the fact that when you're setting up a push job, you have to have credentials somewhere. There has to be credentials supplied for the sending system to push into the receiver, right? And we use SSH and other things in the background, some API keys. There's some good stuff that happens there. But fact of the matter is, you got to have those credentials. Otherwise, you can't push into the receiving system. Otherwise, it'll kick you out. I don't know who you are. Go away. So this is necessary, of course, but people don't stop and think, like, which system is most likely to be compromised if you did get compromised by a bad actor on your network? Well, most likely it's going to be your primary. That's where all your services are running, your apps are running, your shares, all that good stuff. Again, think further. If you're a savvy attacker, what does that mean?
Well, that means I've got the credentials for your secondary system there potentially that I could try to grab.
Absolutely. And again, it's not a design flaw in TrueNAS at all. It's just the nature of how this kind of technology works. So again, you think through the steps of an attacker. Oh, great. Now I can log into the receiving system and go mess up the person's backup too. You don't want that. That's a bad thing. And again, judge your risk. Everything's a risk game, and, weighing the sides and convenience and all that. But that's why pull jobs exist, because you can mitigate that risk by just doing one extra step and going to your receiving system and setting up the pull job. How does that work exactly, Chris? Tell me why that hardens us.
Basically, because you're not going to be regularly logging into that backup system. And more importantly, your backup system is the one that has credentials to the primary. Nothing else has those credentials stored. So even if your primary system did get compromised, somebody keylogged one of your system administrators and they got into that primary system because they're regularly signing in to check on something. They would say, all right, well, I'm going to try to get to that secondary system. It might even be firewalled off to say, I'm not going to accept random inbound connections. Even if you try to directly SSH to it, you might harden that receiving system down so much to say, I'm not going to allow any connections unless I go to the console first and turn on some connectivity. All you're going to let that secondary replication system do is make an initial outbound connection over SSH back to your primary. It says, I don't trust anything else. All I'm going to do is try to reach out on my own, connect to that main system, see if there's any snapshots. If there are, I'm going to bring them over in. Anybody else? Well, go away, kick rocks. I don't feel like letting you come in here. So you can shut down, you can put up a lot of really strong walls around that secondary system and say, nobody's getting in here without a whole different set of keys. You get your separate credentials going on. You turn on your 2FA, but you don't do things like exposing, SMB or NFS or iSCSI off that backup system. You say, this is my vault, and all it's doing is it's holding those snapshots. So even if somehow somebody gets into your primary one, even if they don't get administrative level access, maybe you get hit with a ransomware attack that encrypts everything on all of your SMB shares. There's no, even if you somehow didn't notice that, or they did it right before a replication job, your old snapshot's still going to exist on that secondary system. And all you would need to do is say, well, that new snapshot that we pulled over in a sort of that untrusted method says, well, this new one's full of ransomware. Let's just toss that one. I still have my old one on the other system. I can send it right back the other way.
Absolutely. Again, it's one of those things, I think it's just not intuitive. A lot of people don't stop and think through the implications of that. So we wanted to talk about it here. I have a feeling we just opened a can of worms and the forums are going to be lit tonight. It's people going, oh my God, I need to go change my replication strategy and all that. I hadn't thought of that. But that's cool. That's a good thing. That's what we're here to do, is to, improve each other's knowledge and how we do things, follow security best practices. But yeah, full model, that's how I use it on my system as well at the house for the same reasons. I'm not running, Image or Plex or any of those things on my backup system. That is purely a backup system. Yeah. Right.
It gets a little complicated if you're trying to do things like cross replication between sites, because then obviously each site's going to have each other's credentials. Again, it's one of these things that you have to look at and try to design and say, if you want that really hardened, locked down vault, sometimes you have to say, hey, we're not going to let anything else get in here. This is your third copy. And then you can always add in things like our, the Storj powered cloud backups as yet another tier to say, hey, let's keep things yet one more level of separation.
That's exactly how I do mine. There's two TrueNASs, the primary, the backup, and then your cloud copy, and life is good. I said I'm feeling pretty good about my home security.
Following that 3-2-1 rule pretty strongly there at home. It's great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right.
Well, hey, we got a pile of questions. We got a pile of questions here, Chris. We got some repeat submitters. We got some new ones. So let's just jump right into it here. So, our first question is coming from Ondrej here, and thank you again for another question, Ondrej. He says, what made you move from the REST API to JSON-RPC over WebSocket? Chris, I'll let you handle that one. That's probably in your wheelhouse.
That's a great question, actually. So a lot of folks, I guess, you're at least aware enough to know what REST is, I assume, and WebSockets and all that. So I guess one defining feature difference between REST and WebSockets is persistence. So with every REST API call, you're making a new HTTPS connection out to some API and then waiting for it to return. It comes back with some values. Well, for a modern TrueNAS web UI, just go log in and look around and try and imagine, if you haven't looked at the code, how many API calls that is just to bring up the dashboard. I need to get the CPU information. I need to get the status of the disks. I need to get network information. Just logging into the UI could be dozens of API calls, all individually calling out to REST, blah, 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 and having to wait for that round trip return. And then at some point, it just becomes overwhelming. It's like, wow, we don't want to service that many simultaneous REST requests. Now, WebSockets, the beautiful thing is WebSockets are persistent. So you open that connection once from your browser session, your Angular UI that goes and says, I've established connection, that stays long-lived, I've logged in once, as opposed to having to log in multiple times with every subsequent REST request. And because it's persistent, I can get two-way communication. meaning I can go and connect to TrueNAS's backend over WebSockets. I can leave that connection open while I'm navigating around in the UI, and I can be receiving events now. When you're using REST, you have to poll for everything. So that means if we're using REST, for example, and you have those graphs that show, status of things, we're having to call out every single time to say, give me the next 5 seconds, give me the next 5 seconds, give me the next 5 seconds. With WebSockets, I don't got to do that. The backend just says, oh, I have somebody logged into the web UI, they're listening. I will just send you kind of the live feed of statistics, right?
Yeah. So
way lower cost, faster.
Yeah. Way more efficient. So this should probably turn into, in the future, Chris, a faster, sort of more responsive web UI in there.
Correct.
Everything will work great. When you only have to do that, the one single handshake to set up your TCP connection, it means less overhead on the server side too, because we're just saying, hey, we've only got one TCP connection. Yeah. We're not always building it and tearing it down over and over again.
Yeah, less overhead. And this is how you make the dynamic, really responsive web interfaces. You need that asynchronous communication method where you can go and have events popping up at any given time, and they're nearly in real time now, because I'm not having to wait for some timer to kick off to go poll, which means if an alert fires off, you see it instantly. If stats come in, you see it instantly in your web browser. So we decided, again, because these two models are different, we made the decision to deprecate the REST side, because there's just certain things you can't do easily on the REST side that we can do over WebSockets. And trying to maintain this one-to-one compatibility is impossible, because some things just aren't possible in the REST side. And it frees us up to be more creative and a little more dynamic in the future. So related to that is with Fangtooth, we started the project to version our API entirely too. That'll be completed in Goldeye in the fall. So 25.10, we will have our first official celebration of a versioned API, which means if you're a client, you're talking to TrueNAS either from a web interface or you're writing a command line tool, you'll have a known stable set of API endpoints that will live on for quite some time and go through a proper deprecation period and all that good stuff when there's a new version of the API. Just makes the maintenance so much easier for developers.
Absolutely. Both internal and external developers, I think, will appreciate that versioned API.
Yeah,
thank you for your question, Ondrej. Our next question comes from Andrew, and he asks us, he says, with the need for faster and faster storage infrastructure, is there any path for NVMe-oF support, that being NVMe over Fabrics, to replace or complement iSCSI in future releases? Well, I'll say we aren't going to replace it, because there's still lots of people who want to use legacy iSCSI. We are adding some of the iSCSI extensions for RDMA, I believe, coming up very soon.
Yeah.
But
he's looking for itself. So that's for enterprise side though too. That's not open on the community side.
That's correct.
But he's asking for NVMe over Fabrics. So I think I can say this. Don't yell at me if we're not allowed to talk about this yet. But NVMe over TCP will be coming into Goldeye. So there you go. We have that piece of it is landing. That is on the roadmap officially.
Yeah, NVMe over TCP as distinct from NVMe over RDMA, as distinct from NVMe over Fiber Channel. There's a lot of competing standards in that space. So we're trying to go with one that will be reasonably common to everybody. And of course, the benefit of that will be, higher queue depths from your clients. They'll see it as an NVMe device. I can't speak too much to what could potentially happen, but there's lots of exciting things that are available to us with the addition of that NVMe over Fabric support.
Absolutely. So we do seem to see indications that you'll get some better performance out of it. The NVMe spec, again, is newer, a little bit more optimized. SCSI's been around a long time. So again, it's not going anywhere. We got to support it because people are going to be using that for a long time to come. But this is the natural addition, is to bring the kind of the next gen block protocol to the masses. So again, stay tuned. You'll see some news about that in the coming months as development work happens in the nightly branch, which will eventually become Goldeye in the fall.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Andrew, for getting Chris to tip his hand a little bit there about some exciting upcoming features. Hopefully nobody will yell at him.
Beans.
Nobody will yell at him too much for that. We call it generating hype in the marketing team. So good job on that one. All right. Our next question comes in from Martin, who says, hey, Kris and Chris, your discussion of ECC RAM drew my attention to the podcast, as you were able to give a more differentiated picture of the topic in contrast to most information on the internet. Well, we try to keep a fairly even keel here, and I think we did a good job arguing for both sides of here. And in last week's topic regarding energy efficient systems, I was able to find myself again because I've actually worked with both of the solutions mentioned. Well, thank you. So it says, for some background, I'm a fan of compact and energy efficient systems for years and find the technical process here particularly fascinating. Immersed myself in the world of NAS systems in 2022 with a Kickstarter campaign for the Pi box, which of course was based on a Raspberry Pi NAS. He ended up with ZFS and TrueNAS relatively quickly, but since there wasn't any ARM support, he had to create his own solution with some Debian, ZFS, and Docker, which of course are the three technologies that are underpinning Scale today. Last year, he switched to one of UGREEN's Kickstarter devices, the DXP 2800. He says, the hardware is great for the price, and I didn't want to use the software anyway. Well, we welcome everybody who has that similar opinion. Sometimes the hardware is great, and the software is just, you just don't want to use it. He's in the process of evaluating TrueNAS, and the core of his question is, I would like to install it on that eMMC, the embedded memory module, which of course has a limited lifetime. I could then, if I do this, use both NVMe and SATA slots for data. So the question is, would we generally advise against using eMMC for the OS storage in general? So it's a three-parter, so let's get to this one first. The short answer is yes, we'd probably advise against that, and we'll dig into it more. Is there actually any large amount of data being written to the system partition? Short answer is there's a fair bit more now as compared to earlier revisions, especially now that we've added SMB logging and auditing. And the final question is, even if the system partition breathes its last, the data pool is safe, and of course it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's again, how inconvenienced do you want to be? If that eMMC device is, I don't know if it's soldered in or not, but if it's replaceable and you're willing to replace it at some point, just make sure you're backing up your configs, please. You could do it. Like I said, not the ideal device. We wouldn't recommend that necessarily because, again, Scale is a little bit more modern and has logging, has auditing. We do write more to that system partition. It's not a ton. I mean, it's not a crazy amount, but again, it's enough. And I don't know the durability of that particular eMMC device.
Yeah, eMMC devices do tend to have lower durability than, more traditional NAND. But the biggest challenge, as Kris mentioned, is oftentimes they are, embedded or soldered directly onto the motherboard and they aren't replaceable. Even some of the ones that are, they can sometimes be more expensive than, a conventional NAND solution. So we've seen some users who take these and say, let's wire in one of the internal USB ports on these devices, and let's use a SATA to USB or NVMe to USB converter with a more traditional SSD. And that's a solution that does work fairly well. It's not necessarily the USB bulk storage protocol that's the biggest challenge. It's often just the endurance of the device on the other side of it.
And it's the quality of the controller too, that little translation device. You don't want to get, you can find really cheap things on sketchy corners of the internet, and again, your mileage will vary. So
absolutely. It's a question of
you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, it's a question of, is it going to support things like trim and wear leveling properly to extend the life of that storage? So it may be a case of, you, like Kris says, how much aggravation do you want to subject yourself to if that eMMC device dies? But again, if that does kick off, it's just the system partition. All of your data will be perfectly safe on disk. You could reinstall TrueNAS, re-import your pool, and restore a backup of your system configuration. You'll be right back up and running probably in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Yep. So again, but that's a cool hobby project. Again, post those kind of things in the forums. There's always other people who are curious about how it went for you. And we like to read it too, because we're geeks at the end of the day. It's fun for those homebrew kind of projects.
Absolutely. Post your build logs. If you're doing something, whether it's your homebrew system or something you've bought and you're wedging TrueNAS into, hey, share your information. I'm sure there's plenty of other people who are busy searching on Google that particular device name plus the word TrueNAS, and they'll probably find your article and they'll be really happy.
So the one thing that just tickles me, Kris, is when I go to, I won't say the vendor site, but I go to vendor sites to go look at cards, HBAs or whatever, and I always read the user reviews because that's just how I am. And I love it that it's almost always like, yeah, I use this on TrueNAS. I use this on TrueNAS. And I'm like, oh, that just warms my heart.
Yeah,
so good to see.
And all those Amazon keywords, when you search reviews or Q&A, just punch in TrueNAS, see how many times we come up.
Absolutely.
All right. Hey, in the vein of build logs and DIYs versus purchasing, here's our next question from John. He says, hi, guys. I love that I found your podcast and that we do it as a video on YouTube. Well, Thanks for watching us, John. We really appreciate it. Says, for those of us that gave up building our own computers 20 years ago, but now find ourselves looking at specs and a world we don't always recognize, can you help me figure out, is it worth building your own system versus buying an IX Systems Mini X Plus? I know the forum is a good place for this, but sometimes it can be a little bit too much. He says, I know building versus buying means we don't get a hardware sale, but he says, I want to run a GPU for Plex transcoding. It seems there is a PCI Express slot in the Mini X Plus and the Mini R. Says there don't appear to be too many GPUs out there for that older or smaller bus. He says, my Mini XL from 2016 is running great with scale, but I'd love to get a GPU and use this XL Plus as a target for ZFS replication and have it at my in-laws' house. Well, John, we assume that after listening to this podcast, you're going to do pull replication for your in-laws' house just to make sure that it's extra bit safe.
Absolutely.
So digging into this one a little bit, specifically the PCI Express bandwidth, it's not a full-size slot there, certainly. It is an X4 slot at PCI 3.0 speeds, but that is, first of all, that's still about 4 gigabytes a second of transfer bandwidth, and video transcoding does not actually suffer significantly from using those reduced bandwidth slots. Even when I was testing out that ARC card that I had, I didn't really see any perceivable loss in speed or quality really unless I was deliberately hitting, multiple really high bitrate AV1 streams. And that was probably more the stress on the encoder itself that was failing. Mm-hmm. One of the bigger challenges that you might face in the TrueNAS systems like our X Plus or our R is just the physical limitations. So you're limited to a single slot cooler in the X Plus or the XL. And the slot does technically supposed to limit itself to a 25 watt power delivery. But you have a couple of really good options inside that envelope. One of them that's really popular is the Intel Arc A310 cards. Now, those are the lowest end of the Arc Alchemist series. They're fairly low wattage, low power, but they have that incredible Intel AV1 encoder on them. So they will transcode pretty much anything you can throw at them. Some of our users also in the forums, I don't know if you've ever used one, Chris, but they're leveraging the older Quadro cards. Quadro P400, I believe, is about as inexpensive as you can get. I've seen those as low as like $20 to $25, Chris.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's cheap. No, I've not personally ever used those, but that's cool as an option. I say I would go the ARC route personally. Just don't have to mess with NVIDIA drivers. It just kind of works out of the box, but that's my preference.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a preference question. Again, the older Quadro cards don't have the full codec support, so you won't get decode of things like AV1 and probably even some of the the 10-bit H265 options, for example, or the different color depths. I think it's like 444 or something that doesn't work on them. Well, I'll put a link to Intel's decode matrix or Intel and NVIDIA's decode matrix, and you can sort of sort out what you have as an option. But absolutely, this is a good question to ask in the forums to say, hey, anybody who has a Mini X or XL, are you running video transcoding on it, and did you throw a GPU in there? So
okay, again, post your results. We'd love to hear how that goes, and good luck to you. It sounds like a fun project, and again, go the Intel route. That's
don't be scared of the forums. I mean, hey, I'm on there myself. If you need help, tag the Honey Badger, and I'm happy to come in and contribute and give you some insight whenever I have a chance.
Yeah, and I get summoned occasionally too. I try and make an appearance. So happy to jump in where I can be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for your question, John. Absolutely. Well, that was a lot of them. We still have quite a few questions left. We've seen some additional ones where we might have to keep them in the queue. I think there's a great one here that's talking about the special VDEV. I think we might have to do a full episode on that one just because there was a lot to unpack when you start talking about those. So,
he practically wrote our show notes for us. Thank you.
Yeah, basically, yeah. We see your question, Jason. We acknowledge you, and I think we may have to do this as a full episode just to talk about the special VDEV.
Okay. Well, again, looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks everybody for tuning in this week. As always, feel free to submit more and more questions to t3@truenas.com. Drop us a message in the comment section below. We'll try to jump in there and answer them fairly quickly, unless you made it so long that we're going to have to turn it into a video on its own. Don't forget to like this video, hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and Chris and I will see you next time.